So I think the thing about age is really important because, again, self-injury, it's associated usually with teenagers and usually with teenage girls. And the honest answer is we don't know, because it's really problematic the way self-injury is measured, which is a whole other kind of discussion. But ultimately, it spreads across the entire spectrum. So again, people in my research who were adults at the time they were talking about, they talked about, their earliest memories of self-injuring were at the age of 4 or 5. And then lots of practitioners have talked about people in their late 60s to 70s. So it spans the entire spectrum. I think we very much tend to focus on young people, partly because we kind of see them as a bit of a pathological group anyway, don't we? It's kind of like being young, you're a bit mad and dangerous and a risk to the world and yourself. But again, I mean, if you think about it, some of the places where there's the highest rates of self-injury, it will be where you have adults, so prisons, psychiatric hospitals, facilities for people with intellectual disabilities, addiction and homeless services all have really high rates. So it's across the spectrum. But yeah, there is very much that stereotype. It's a young female issue, and that's not true at all. And it would be similar rates between males and females. And again, for various reasons, male self-injury tends to be hidden. I think partly because there might be some differences in the way that males and females self-injure. So it seems that it's possibly more likely that girls and women will cut themselves, and that men and boys will use other ways to hurt themselves. So they do things like hitting themselves, banging themselves, bruising themselves. And again, of course, because we live in a world where it's totally acceptable for men and boys to go around looking battered and bruised and injured, nobody questions those injuries in the same way you would if you saw a girl going around with sort of bruises and bangs all up her body. It's just, oh well, he's just a lad, probably a sports injury. And again, so we miss so much of it among men, and young men in particular. So yeah, age and gender, they're really important things to be aware of, that what we see is not necessarily true to the whole picture. And then the other question was about what counts as self-harm. So, and sorry if I'm going to be a bit boring and academic now, but so I use the term self-injury for a very specific reason, because when I'm talking about self-injury, it's about any action that causes direct and immediate pain or damage to the body, and that's the intention and purpose of it. Whereas technically, self-harm is a broader category of things that people do. So self-harm would be any action that causes pain or damage to the body, but it may or may not be immediate, and it may or may not be the direct intention and purpose. So within the category of self-harm, there's the sort of socially acceptable forms of self-harm, like drinking, smoking, over-exercising, dieting. There's also things like beauty practices, tattooing, piercing. So some socially acceptable, some not. And then there's also the kind of coping self-harm behaviours, which would include things like eating disorders, sexual risk-taking, alcohol and drug misuse. And again, they are slightly different to self-injury because while they're coping mechanisms, so, issues around food use, it can be a way that someone copes with their experiences. But the pain and damage to the body, it's not as immediate, and it's not necessarily the direct intention and purpose in the same way that it is if someone has, for example, burnt themselves or hit themselves, or, to use the stereotype, cut themselves. So self-injury, it's kind of a very specific set of practices within the bigger pool of self-harm. And I think the whole thing about understanding self-harm can still be really helpful for understanding self-injury, though. So just for example,